Tonight's shiur is dedicated to the memory, to the Aliyas Neshama of Avi Yachad ben Avram Avinu.
Amen, amen. So hello everybody, and this parsha, when you read this parsha, it really resonates very much with at least a parent as he gets older. All of us experience, Baruch Hashem, many of you are young, you haven't experienced it yet, but the concept as your children get older, you kind of begin to get a sense that they're the new generation, they're kind of taking over. We begin to recede a little bit into the background, and that actually is what happens in the parsha a little bit. Avram's still very much alive. He dies at the end of the parsha, but you get the sense that we're now beginning the story of somebody else. We're beginning the story of Yitzchak. And we know at last week's parsha, Yitzchak was brought as a korban, and Avram was told to slaughter him. At the last moment, God didn't change his mind, but God withdrew the command. You may have heard, I'm not going to talk about the Akeda, I'm going to talk about something in this parsha, but there actually is a passage in the Zohar that's quite remarkable. The Zohar says that Avram actually killed Yitzchak. Yitzchak died at the Akeda. That's why it says, after the Akeda, Abraham returned to his youths. Where was Yitzchak? Yitzchak died. Imagine Abraham coming home to Sarah. Now you understand a little bit the midrashic tradition that Sarah died when she heard the news. If the news that she heard was Yitzchak was actually killed, that would be quite a shocking news. And according to the Zohar, Yitzchak was dead for 2 or 3 years. Different girsos, as it were. And Avram, and imagine what this means. As far as Avram is concerned, forget about God's promises. All he has is Yishmael, who is not righteous, who is not going to be the bearer of the covenant. There is nobody else. Imagine the challenge to Avram's faith. The challenge of the Akeda, according to the Zohar, was not only Avram's willingness to kill his son, but the fact that his son was taken away from him, and there seemed to be no hope. He's not going to have another kid, that's pretty sure. So imagine 3 years later, when Yitzchak shows up at the door, Techiyat HaMeitim, what a joy that was. But okay, but be it as it may, the parsha, Pchai Sarah, is a relatively short parsha, and it only deals with 2 themes. It deals with the death and the burial of Sarah Imenu in Hebron, and then it deals with Abraham finding a wife for his son Yitzchak. And I'm going to focus on the latter theme of Abraham looking for a wife. Now remember the story here. Abraham has to send a shaliach because Abraham wants a wife from his family, which is in Haran, Mesopotamia. Yitzchak, because he is a sanctified korban, is not allowed to leave the land of Israel. So Yitzchak himself cannot go where the woman is. Abraham himself is too old and he doesn't want to leave Israel anyway, so he has to dispatch his faithful shaliach, Eliezer. Now the Gemara already remarks in Chulin that there's an extraordinarily great amount of repetition in these narratives. You can just count the number of times the story is recounted again and again. First is when Abraham has a conversation with Eliezer. Then Eliezer carries out the instructions. Then he tells Besuel and then Lavan both the conversation and the instructions as he carried them out. Now we have a general rule that the Torah normally does not repeat narratives. The Torah could have said, for example, after it gave you the story, it could have said, Eliezer told Besuel everything that happened. You don't have to repeat it every single time. And the Gemara recounts in Chulin, it says somewhat laconically, Yafa sichasan shel avdei avos, yaiser mitayrasan shel banim. Hashem has a greater love and affection for even the casual conversation of the slaves of the Avos, more than all of the Torah that he gave to the descendants. Because many, many halachos in the Torah are learnt out of an extra word, an extra letter. The Torah is not going to give you a verse if it can communicate the halacha through a letter or a word. So when it comes to the Torah that Hashem gives Am Yisrael, Hashem has brevity and economy of expression. But when it comes to Eliezer's conversations, over and over and over and over again. So the one point the Gemara is making is that repetition, redundancy, verbosity is sometimes a sign of God's affection and God's love for the subject. God loves Avram, he loves Yitzchak, and therefore everything about the Avos is repeated and elaborated upon. That's the perspective of the Gemara. But here is the thing, one has to pay very careful attention. Whenever the Torah repeats narratives, you have to pay very careful attention not only to the repetitions, but to the differences on the various levels of reiteration. If the Torah repeats a story, version B is very rarely, if ever, the same as version A, and version C will be different than both B and A. So if the Torah repeats the whole account of Eliezer finding a wife for Yitzchak, we have to pay very careful attention to the omissions between one version and the other, the contradictions, the change in sequence, the change of names. And this, to use a fancy academic term, this is the approach that is called omni-significance. There is a concept that everything in the holy inspired writings of the Torah, and really all of Tanakh, Nevi'im and Kesuvim, has a significance. There is no such thing, for example, as a change in a word that's just, a different expression. There's always a reason, there's always a significance. And what I want to look at tonight is some of the significant lessons that we can derive from how the narrative is changed from one speaker to the other speaker, from one point in the Parsha to the other point in the Parsha. Now the Abravanel, the great commentary of the Abravanel, Rabbi Yitzchak Abravanel, as you probably know, was the finance minister for Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain in the 1490s. And in fact, he was the one that raised money for Columbus's expedition, which eventually wound up in his expedition to the New World, as it was called. And when the Jews were expelled from Spain, unless they converted, in 1492, the same year as the Columbus voyage, the Abravanel was so important to the king that the king gave the Abravanel permission to stay in Spain and remain a practicing Jew. The only Jew that was given that permission. The Abravanel did not accept that offer, and the Abravanel left with all the other Jews that left Spain. There is a Masorah that the final expulsion of the Jews from Spain was on Tisha B'Av. Historians have a lot of problems with that. It actually does not fit the chronology that well. But there's a further Masorah, which might be legendary, that the Abravanel, as the elder leader of the Jewish people, instructed that as they're leaving Spain, they should play joyous instrumental music, even though it was the 9th of Av. And the reason was because their spirit was so broken that he felt that they needed some type of chizuk to be able to assume their new life. A little bit of, I don't want to call it trivia, but an interesting little factoid. At the head of the procession was Don Yitzchak Abravanel, who was the leader of the Jews of Spain. He was in his 70s at the time. Towards the end of the procession was a 4-year-old boy with his mother, and that 4-year-old boy grew up to be Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who first went to Turkey, and then eventually, as you know, went to Tzfat, where the Shulchan Aruch was written. So Rav Yosef Karo was actually part of the group that was expelled from Spain in 1492. Okay, so the Abravanel actually enumerates no fewer than 50 differences in between the stories as they are recounted. We are not going to go over 50 differences. We don't have time, but I'm going to go over 5 differences And the 5 differences will teach us some very, very important, and I hope beautiful points, meaningful points about marriage and what you look for in a relationship and what are the most important qualities that you need to focus on. First discrepancy, and again this might be, hopefully will not be too difficult to follow if you don't have a text in front of you, so I'll try to keep it not extremely technical, is Avram calls his servant, by the way, it does not say he's Eliezer, remember that, but we know Chazal say it's Eliezer, who's identified in other places as Avram's servant, and he says to Eliezer, I have a mission, my son cannot marry somebody from the Canaanites, you should go El Artzi v'el Moladati, go to my land and Moledet, and the place of my origin, the place of my birth. So Avram Avinu gave Eliezer a mission to go to Artzi u'Moladati. When Eliezer arrives, and he is telling Besuel, who is Rivka's father, about his conversation with Avram, he uses a slightly different expression about what his mission was. Instead of saying, Artzi u'Moladati, he says, Avram told me to go El Mishpachti, to my family, Ubei Savi, and my father's house. Now most Meforshim, granted, say it's the same thing. When Avram said go to my land, he meant go to my family. Right? They don't differentiate. But if you read the Psukim very, very literally, it seems, for some crazy reason that we're going to have to figure out, that Avram did not explicitly say, go to my family. Avram's request was geographic. And Eliezer changed it to be relational. Avram said, go to my land, go to my place of birth, and find somebody. Literally, he did not say it had to be of his family. It's only in Eliezer's reiteration of the story, Eliezer changes Artzi u'Moladati to Mishpachti u'Beit Avi. Now, we understand why Avram might want his family, but why would he care about geography? Why is the geography of any importance here at all? That's difference number 1. The definition of the mission. Is it geographical or is it relational, family? Geography or family? Mission number 2. Distinction number 2. And I'm going to go out of order here. In the narrative, when Eliezer devises a test, and of course all of us understand that the test Eliezer devises is not a superstitious test. It's not like saying, oh, the first woman that wears a red dress I'm going to take as a wife, or the first woman that jumps around or puts her left foot in front of her right foot. Eliezer's test is not a test of superstition or omen. Eliezer's test is a test of character and midos. Chesed, the woman that will offer to give me water and offer my camels, etc. And then Rivka passes the test, as we will see. And then it says Eliezer gave her the jewelry, and only after he gave her the jewelry, he then asked her, Bas Miyat, oh, by the way, who are you the daughter of? He didn't even know until after he gave the jewelry. Now, when Eliezer recounts the story to first Besuel and then Lavan, Eliezer says, oh, after the woman passed the test, I asked her, Bas Miyat, and only when she said she was your daughter did I then give her the jewelry. Rashi explains the reason why Eliezer changed the order of the story was because he wanted to be logical and coherent. If he would have said, I gave her the jewelry, and then I asked Bas Miyat, Lavan would say, are you crazy? Why did you give her the jewelry? You didn't know who she was. So Eliezer changed to make the story make sense. But the obvious question is, if it doesn't make sense to give the jewelry until you know Bas Miyat, then why did Eliezer give her the jewelry before he asked Bas Miyat? So that's question number 2. Discrepancy number 3, a little bit. Eliezer devised a test. Now, did Rivka comply with the exact conditions of the test? She actually did not. She deviated from his test, but she did better in the following way. Eliezer said, I will go over, the women are coming to draw water for the sheep, and the woman that says, I will give you and your animals water, that is the woman that God has designated for my master's son. In other words, the test basically was, not only is she concerned about me, but she's even concerned about the camels, the animals, the donkeys, whatever it would be. So when Eliezer set up the parameters of the test, the woman is supposed to say, I will give you and your animals water. That is actually not what Rivka did. Rivka gave Eliezer water only after he drank his fill, did she then say, I will go back and draw water for your animals. So she did not do exactly as he stipulated, but her chesed is even greater. The way she did it was greater than Eliezer stipulated, because here's the thing. If I tell you, I will give you and your animals water, number one, that's a certain denigration of human dignity. That's implying, you and the animals are the same. Moreover, you might be inhibited in drinking all that you need to drink because you were told, I'm giving you this water for you and your animals, meaning you better save something for the animals. So the way Rivka did it was, she said to Eliezer, this is all for you. Drink as much as you want. And then she offers to make a separate trip to draw up the water for the animals. So, did she comply with the exact test that Eliezer devised? She did not. But she did better, given the fact that this is not an omen. See, when you're dealing with omens, things have to be exact. But this is not an omen test. This is a character test. This is a test to demonstrate that someone is kind and compassionate and giving. So if Rivka showed a greater kindness than Eliezer even expected, that's good. On the other hand, when Eliezer is recounting the story to Lavan, Bethuel died in the meantime, as you know, because, the Medrash tells that. Chazal had a problem because Bethuel is the father of the bride. So Eliezer is negotiating with Bethuel, and then at some point in the narrative, Bethuel seems to have disappeared, and Eliezer is now negotiating with Lavan, that is Rivka's brother. So the disappearance of Bethuel is absolutely not explained in the text at all. So Chazal have a whole interpretation that Lavan tried to poison Eliezer so he could take all of the wealth, and the poison got switched, and Bethuel took it instead. So Lavan actually killed his father, and that's why Bethuel is out of the picture. Okay, but be it as it may, when Eliezer tells Lavan the story, Eliezer makes the story a 100% compliance. He says, I said, the one that gives me the water and also my animals, that is the one, and Rivka is quoted as saying, I am giving it to you and the animals. In other words, Eliezer makes the compliance more literal and more exact and more precise than it actually was. He changes what Rivka did to make it fit the terms of the test. So I think I mentioned 3 discrepancies so far. Again, just to be sure everyone has them in mind. One is Avram emphasized geography. Eliezer redefined it as family. Eliezer gave the jewelry and then asked, who's her father? When he tells the story, he says, I asked who was her father, and then I gave her the jewelry. Rivka did not follow the exact sequence of Eliezer's test, But when Eliezer recounts the story, he says that she did. That's the third discrepancy. The fourth discrepancy is the omission of part of the conversation. And that is, after Abraham says to Eliezer, you must go to my land and find a wife for Yitzchak, and you must swear to me that you will do so, Eliezer asks a question, what if the woman refuses to come? Shall I take your son there? And Abraham says, Chas v'shalom, under no circumstances can you take my son there. Under no circumstances. Now, interestingly enough, when Eliezer recounts that part of the conversation to Besuel and Lavan, he does mention, I asked my master, what if the woman doesn't want to come? But the answer that he says Abraham said was, God will surely give you success. Now that's not what Abraham said. Abraham did not say, God will surely give you success. Abraham just said, don't let my son go there. So that's a deviation in the conversation. That's the fourth one. The fifth one and final one, I don't want to overwhelm you with, I'm only giving you 10% of the Abravanel's Shinuyim, is there's a famous drasha when Eliezer says, Ulai lo soveh ha'isha lolechas. That means perhaps the woman won't want to go. So the word ulai is written in, which means perhaps, is written without a vav. Now ulai without a vav, since we don't have vowels in a Sefer Torah, could also be read elai, to me. And Rashi brings a fascinating medrash that Eliezer himself was a Canaanite, but he was a faithful, devoted servant of Abraham. He was Abraham's disciple. Eliezer had a daughter. So when Eliezer says, perhaps the woman won't want to go, Eliezer is hinting to Abraham, Eli, to me, perhaps my daughter would be a suitable shidduch. That's the double entendre. Ulai, maybe, Eli, to me. Right? Eliezer had a daughter and Abraham refused that daughter. Abraham did not, we'll discuss why. But what's interesting is the double entendre of Eli Ulai, based on the Ulai being spelled without a vav, only appears when Eliezer is recounting that conversation to Lavan. In the actual conversation he has with Abraham, when he actually raises the question, it only says Ulai with a vav. The double entendre is not available in the initial conversation. It is only available in the recounting of the conversation. Now, that doesn't fit, because if Eliezer is openly suggesting he has a daughter, that would have been evident in the initial conversation. Why does it only appear in the iteration? Finally, this is not a discrepancy, but just an observation that we're going to try to explain. It's important to remember, Eliezer, as I mentioned before, Eliezer's name is not mentioned at all. In fact, we only know it's Eliezer because Chazal identify him as Eliezer, and we know Eliezer from another parsha is Avram's servant. But in this parsha, we're so used to Eliezer being the person that we could almost swear that his name must be mentioned. Look carefully. His name is not mentioned whatsoever. The only thing that is referred to is Eved Avraham, the servant of Abraham. Theoretically, Abraham had more than one servant. This could have been some other Eved. Chazal say it happens to be Eliezer, but the text does not give him a name. That also needs some explanation. Why is his name not mentioned? Okay, so I've mentioned 5 discrepancies and 1 observation about why is Eliezer's name not mentioned in the narrative at all. So here, let's start off with the very first discrepancy. Avraham focused on geography, Artzi umoladati. Eliezer redefined the mission to be family, Beit Avi umishpachti. What's going on? So let me start with an observation of the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, one of the great Rishonim of the 1300s, the 14th century. And he raises the following interesting question. Avram is refusing to make a shidduch with Eliezer's daughter. Eliezer is righteous. Eliezer is holy. Eliezer is devoted. Eliezer is loyal. Avram's family are idol worshippers. They're of the Avodah Zarah. Is Avram a racist? In other words, here's the point. Why would Avram prefer a shidduch with idolatrous pagans over a righteous, holy person who has observed Avram's teachings? Why shouldn't there be a shidduch with Eliezer? What is so great about Avram's family or Avram's place, however you define it? So the Drashas Haran says a remarkable thought. It is true that the people of Haran, right, that was the Avram city, were idol worshippers. But they had one redeeming characteristic. They were kind. They had Rahmanut. They had Chesed. They had a good heart. Says the Ran, in choosing a partner in life, the most important thing to focus on is kindness, caring, and compassion. Even if the person is an idolater, because idolatry means a person has erroneous theological ideas. Erroneous theological ideas can be corrected by education, training, and exposure. But if one does not have a kind heart, that's much, much more difficult to acquire. Now, I don't mean it's impossible. Obviously, we believe that people can change for the good, but it's very, very difficult. Intellectually, you can teach me all sorts of things, and I can absorb it. But to change the heart, very, very difficult. So Avraham, this is the Drashas Haran, so Avraham's shikol was that the Canaanites were cruel people. There was a streak of cruelty. Now, we have to assume that Eliezer himself worked on himself and was righteous. But Avraham said that because it was built into the psyche of the Canaanites, a certain cruelty, then who knows when that could emerge at some future generation. And therefore Avraham said, better to take a shidduch from an idolatrous pagan group that has kindness and rachamim than to make a shidduch with even a righteous person that has cruelty in their nature, because that cruelty is very, very difficult to uproot, and it may emerge at any given point. Now, this is very, very interesting. I think that Drashas Haran ought to be publicized in yeshivos and other places, because very often when people are looking for shidduchim, the question is, does the chassan wear the requisite correct black hat or whatever it is? In fact, I once saw a Purim play. It was a bit of a parody about the shidduch process, in which a rabbi's on the phone, and the rabbi is discussing how great the chassan is. You know, he learns, 10 hours a day, and he has a Borsalino hat, and he has sitches out and everything else. And then the rabbi gets a question. You only see the rabbi's part of the conversation. The rabbi says, Midos? You're asking me about Midos? I really don't know. Nobody's ever asked me about that. I don't know, So in a way, you see, we have our priorities a little mixed up in terms of what we look for. They tell a story of the Marshal of Shlomo Luria, who lived in the 1500s. And the Marshal, there were two stories here. Story number one is that a man had a wife, and the wife was very ill, but she was a very jealous woman. So she made her husband swear he will never remarry after she dies. So he didn't want to upset her. He made an oath, a solemn oath, that he will never get married again. She dies, and after a while he feels he's lonely, he wants to get married. So he goes to the Marshal and he asks the Marshal, is he bound by his oath? So the Marshal paskin, since there's a mitzvah to get married, you cannot make an oath to violate a mitzvah, so the oath is null and void, get married. So he marries a second wife, and 2 days after he gets married, he dies. So the second wife is she goes to the marshal and says, you are responsible for the death of my husband, because obviously he died as punishment for violating the oath, and you told him it was okay, and you are responsible for his death. Of course, without the marshal, they wouldn't have been married anyway, but you are responsible for his death. So she says to the marshal, do something about it. So it is recorded in the records of the city of Krakow that the marshal prayed to Hashem, and he wrote a long responsum, a long tshuva, justifying his halachic decision. He ordered the man's coffin to be open. The psak halacha was put into the coffin, and it was determined that somebody, who's the somebody, made a mistake in the halacha, that the man should not have been punished for the oath. The oath was not valid, and the man came back to life. Miracle 1. But some people aren't happy. The woman still complained. The woman goes to the marshal and says, it just isn't the same. I feel like I'm with a zombie. I mean, I saw this man in the ground. I saw him buried, and now he's with me. I can't feel the same, closeness to him. She says to the marshal, do something about it. So the marshal prayed that she should feel the same love and affection and connection that she felt before he died. That's story number 2. So story number 1 is the resurrection. Story number 2 is the change of heart. So then there's a footnote appended by the sages of Krakow that they said, in our judgment, story number 2 is a greater miracle than story number 1. It is harder to change the heart than it is to resurrect the dead. The first story was resurrection of the dead. The second story was changing the heart, and that's even more difficult. And Rav Salanter famously remarked that it is easier to learn the entire Talmud than to improve one negative character trait. So the Ran says this is what Avram was looking for. And this, by the way, is how Eliezer knew what the test was, because otherwise you can ask the question, who told Eliezer that this was the quality that he should be looking for? Right? Avram didn't say, look for loving kindness. But according to the Ran, it's very clear. The whole reason Avram is saying, go to this other place, is because they have a teva of kindness and rachamim, and Memela Eliezer understands that that is the test that he's looking for. Now, this is what the Ran says, and as I say, this is a very important and practical lesson as to what we should value in a spouse. But with this Ran, I think we can have a key. The Ran himself does not use his explanation for all of the differences, but I think it can be key to all of the differences. Difference number 1, Avram asked for geography. Well, the reason is, Avram was not concerned about family at all. Avram didn't care. Avram basically sent Eliezer to Haran, because in Haran, the Anshe HaMakom, as they may have been deceptive, they may have been idolatrous, they had kindness and rachamim. So mitzad Avraham, family didn't make a difference. He was looking for the midah of Chesed. And that's why Avram said, go to my land, go to the place of my birth, because you will find the qualities that I value and the qualities that I need. But here is the thing. Now, therefore, let's go to the second point. Therefore, from Eliezer's standpoint, as soon as the woman passed the test, he didn't have to know Bas Miyat, because it didn't make a difference. That was an after-the-fact question. He could give her the jewelry right away. Right, so that's why Eliezer didn't follow the sequence. Because if Avram's mission was geography based on Chesed, then when she passed the Chesed, it's great. And the fact that she didn't do it exactly the way he set it up, but she did it better, in other words, she first let him drink and then made a separate trip for the camels, only makes it better. So based on the mission, Eliezer's behavior is totally consistent. But here is the story. When Eliezer talks to Besuel and then to Lavan, he has to be a salesman. He has to butter up the mechutanim. After all, according to Chazal, Rivka is a very, very young girl. Chazal, there are two opinions in Chazal. Rashi follows the opinion Rivka is only 3, and countless generations of people find this impossible. How can this 3-year-old do all of this stuff? On the other hand, I can tell you, in my neighborhood, I'm sure other places too, I see kids walking into a makolet that are not much older, and they're schlepping the milk and other things. So so apparently, little kids can do all of these things. According to another view of Chazal, she was 14. So there are two views in Chazal, but she is young. She is relatively young, and Eliezer is proposing to take her more than 1,000 miles away. So Eliezer has to make his case. So listen to this. One of the ways he makes his case is by emphasizing that the great and the famous Abraham, the patriarch, the famous, wealthy, influential person, specifically wants you. In other words, Eliezer can't just say, oh, my master sent me to Haran to find somebody. That's not very impressive. Lavan might say, so find somebody else. Rather, Eliezer changes the mission to say, Abraham sent me to find you. You're special. You're unique. The great Nasi Elohim wants you. Memela, that is why Eliezer changes the definition of the mission. Instead of saying, go to my land, he says, go to my family. Now, here is the thing that countless children have discovered. Once you change one part of the story, you got to be sure to change the other parts of the story, or you get caught in a contradiction. Once Eliezer changed the mission from geography to family, he could no longer say, I first gave her the jewelry and then I asked who she was, because then Lavan could say, how could you give her the jewelry until you know she's my daughter, or Lavan, my sister? So that's why he had to say, but because he changed it to Beis Avi Mishpachti, he had to say, I asked her who she was, and then I gave her the jewelry. He's making it consistent. Now, I had mentioned the third discrepancy, that he set up a test, and Rivka did not do the exact test. She did not say, I'll give you and the camels. Rather, she said, I'll give you, and after he drank, she brought up the camels. But when he tells Lavan, he makes it exact. Because here is the thing. As a salesman, Eliezer is describing the test in a different way than Eliezer intended it. Eliezer intended this as simply a logical, rational exercise to see that she has good midot. But in order to impress Lavan, who is into superstition and idolatry, he has to present it as an omen, meaning the gods have agreed to this. Now, in order for something to be an omen, it's not enough that it's better than the test. Omens have to be exact. Omens, superstitions. So therefore, from Eliezer's perspective, he was looking for character. She did better than his test. But in order to impress the Mechutanim, in order to impress Lavan, he has to turn it into an omen, and that's why he makes it into an exact correspondence, although it was not in fact an exact correspondence. So now we've explained, number one, geography versus family, the sequence of the jewelry versus the name, the fact that Rivka did not do exactly what Eliezer stipulated, but Eliezer makes it sound as if she did, right? Those three differences. Now we also understand the Eli. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Now the other issue was when when Eliezer brought up the question, what if the woman doesn't want to go? And Avram says, Chas v'shalom, don't take her there. But in the conversation, Eliezer does not give that answer. You understand it very well. If Eliezer's goal is to flatter Lavan into recognizing how important he is, how is Lavan going to feel if Eliezer says, oh, by the way, my master made me swear that Yitzchak will never set foot in this house under no circumstances. So he has to leave it out because that's an insult to the Mechutanim. When B'dafka he has to build it up. Now this also explains the double entendre. In other words, the Eli Ulai reference that Avram rejected my own daughter as a potential shidduch testifies to the greatness of Eliezer. Eliezer is revealing to Lavan a piece of information that is deeply embarrassing and hurtful to him. He's trying to tell Lavan, look how important you are, that in spite of my closeness to Avram, he rejected me in favor of you. Meaning, when Eliezer is talking to Avram, he did not intimate explicitly that he had a daughter. Implicitly, Avram rejected it because Avram didn't take it on. But Eliezer did not. That's how faithful he was. When he's talking to Avram, it's simply, Ulai, what if the woman doesn't want to go? It is only in the discussion with Lavan that Eliezer reveals the pain that he felt, that he was passed over. And that's the Eli and the Ulai. And finally, this is why his name is not mentioned. Because Eliezer was so selfless in the shlichut that he was really anonymous. He was not a separate person. He was none other than the extension of Abraham. Now, here is the point that you need to keep in mind. Essentially, what I'm saying is, Eliezer lied, or at least misstated, a number of facts in order for the shidduch to be successful. Now, let me hasten to add that obviously I'm not endorsing lying in shidduchim. That's a very serious problem, as a matter of fact. People have to be honest and upfront. But in this unusual case, where you're essentially taking a woman out of an idolatrous home in order to bring her to Kedusha, Eliezer is changing some of the facts in order to maximize the probability of success. Now here you have to understand what a sacrifice that is on his part. Remember that he does have a daughter. Remember that he's righteous. Remember that he's loyal. Remember that he's faithful. The fact that Avraham trusted him to go on the mission and not sabotage it in itself is a great testament to Eliezer. Avraham was not concerned with conflict of interest. Eliezer, on one level, had every incentive to mess up the mission. Because at that point there may be a fallback position that maybe his daughter will be okay. But here's the thing. Not only did Eliezer not sabotage the mission, Eliezer went beyond the call of duty. Because Eliezer could have described everything exactly as it happened, and that wouldn't have impressed Lavan so much. And Eliezer could then honestly report to Avram, I did everything you asked me to do. Didn't work. And maybe his daughter might be chosen. You see, not only did Eliezer not let his conflict of interest undermine the mission, but he literally devised strategies that were against his own individual interest to maximize success. That's an unbelievable faithfulness to Abraham, and as I indicated, that is why his very name is not mentioned, because he literally obliterated his personality. There was no personal interest in any of this. And this is indeed why he is called Eved Avraham. Again, it's a remarkable testament to the loyalty of a true Eved of Avraham, who of course was an Eved Hashem because of this. The bottom line lessons that we take from the whole Parsha is, of course, the Drasha Saran's idea that the most important quality that one looks for in a marriage is a good heart, one that cares, balat chesed. And this would be true not only for mitzad the woman, but also mitzad the man, because once again, religious issues are intellectual issues, meaning is there a God, etc. These are things that one can work on, one can change. When one is convinced of the truth, one can move on. But changing the heart is very, very difficult. We say at a bris, kishem shenichnas lebris, as the child entered the covenant, so may he enter Torah, the learning of Torah, chuppah, getting married, masim tovim, and good deeds. So the Mefarshim ask a question that those three steps are not in order. Okay, bris is always the first one, that's for sure, 8 days old. Torah, as soon as the child is able to talk, we try to teach them words. But chuppah, masim tovim. The simple meaning of masim tovim are the mitzvos that you do when you become an adult, bar mitzvah. Marriage, even in the time of Chazal, was at the age of 18. So why does it say chuppah and then masim tovim? It should say masim tovim, which are bar mitzvah, and then chuppah, which is 18 and usually older than 18, right? The order is not correct. So one of the answers that is given is, let us go back to the creation of Adam and Eve, right? First there was Adam in Gan Eden, and Hashem said, and he named all the animals, he couldn't find a helpmate to be with him. So what did God say? The famous words, Lo tov heyota adam levado. It is not good for man to be alone. Eselo ezer kinegdo. I will make for him a partner to be opposite him. Now the Torah asks the question, what does it mean it is not good for man to be alone? After all, man is in the Garden of Eden. He has an unlimited capacity to eat whatever he wants, except for that one little tree, but everything else is okay. He doesn't really have a need for laundry. He says he's naked at this point. What's so gefelach? I mean, he's in the Garden of Eden. What's so bad about being alone? So listen to what the Torah says. Man in a state of aloneness, and this is really the human being in a state of aloneness, has an infinite capacity to take whatever he wants from the world. But he doesn't have someone to whom he can give. And since man is made in the image of God, and God is only a giver, not a taker, because there's nothing you can give to God, you can be godly only if you give rather than take. And therefore, the interpretation is a slightly different translation. Instead of saying, it is not good for man to be alone, what it means is, man cannot be good in a state of aloneness. Because the meaning of good is godliness. God is good. I become good to the degree I emulate God. I become good if I'm a giver more than a taker. Therefore, man must have a companion to whom he can give, and only then will he be good in a state of goodness. So the Torah says, marriage was created not to give me something, or to put it another way, marriage was created to enable me to become a giver in life rather than a taker, and thereby achieve godliness and communion with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this is actually a more following reason. This is actually a case I'm aware of. A very wealthy man married a much younger woman, and after around a year, she wanted a divorce. And the man complained, because the man said, I don't know what she's complaining about. I give her everything. I give her, 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 I give her. So the rabbi asked him, do you ever let her give you anything? And he said, I don't need anything from her. I want to be the giver. You have to understand that part of being a selfless giver is to open yourself up to receive what the other person has to give you. Because when you enable the other person to be a giver, you're giving them self-esteem, you're giving them respect, you're valuing what they are. So it's a very, very subtle thing. When I say the purpose of marriage is to learn how to be a giver, part of being a giver is opening yourself up to being a receiver. Because the greatest gift you can give someone is to show that you value what they give you. And in this case, the idea was that the woman felt she's just on the receiving end of a guy that's just, doing favors. She never has an opportunity to be someone that is contributing. So it's very, very subtle. In other words, giving does involve a certain amount of taking in a non-selfish way. So going back to the Brit, let me just explain the idea. If you understand that becoming a giver is reaching a state of tov, it is not tov for a man to be alone. Now we understand why Masim Tovim comes after chuppah. If Masim Tovim meant mitzvos, that's bar mitzvah. That should have been Masim Tovim and then chuppah. But if we understand Masim Tovim as acts of godliness based on kindness, although of course we do those deeds even before we're married, but marriage creates new opportunities. For example, let me give you a very prosaic example. There are many areas of life which are not governed by halacha. For example, if I have to make a decision, do I want to have Cheerios or cornflakes for breakfast? I'm not going to ask Rav Chaim Kanevsky. Oh, actually, some people will ask him, but I'm not going to ask him. What should I choose? What does Das Torah say I should do? And he will answer, as he does answer numerous times, Kirtzonecha, do what you want, don't bother me. He doesn't say don't bother me, but do what you want, Kirtzonecha. So there are many decisions in life that we might say are neutral. Right? Should I live here, live there, assuming both are Torah communities and the like. Now, so cornflakes, Cheerios, my business, nobody cares. But now I get married, and the first time during Sheva Brachos, I got to go shopping, and my wife likes cornflakes, and I like Cheerios. And all of a sudden, I'm walking by the cereal aisle, and I got to make a momentous decision. Do I focus on my needs? Do I focus on what she wants? Do I try to accommodate everybody? At that point, the most mundane, insignificant part of life becomes an opportunity for godliness, for compassion, for goodness, for thinking about somebody else. That level where every decision, where you live, what type of furniture is in your house, what goes on the wall, and you think about what will make another person happy, you have elevated the trivial decision, the otherwise trivial decision of what breakfast cereal, what vase, what picture on the wall, now becomes a potential of godliness and goodness. And that comes after chuppah. From chuppah, potentially, every decision in life becomes masim tovim. And the Ran is telling us that is why we look for that quality. By the way, they say that the reason why, in Hebrew, Yam HaMelech, of course, is the salt sea, but the English name for Yam HaMelech is the Dead Sea. Now, normally we don't make drushas on the English names of things, but here they do have a little drusha on why it's called the Dead Sea. Why is it so dead? No, the simple meaning why it's dead, of course, is that because of the mineral content, no fish can live in the Dead Sea. But the drusha is because the Dead Sea only receives water. Nothing comes out of the Dead Sea. So when you live a life of taking and not giving, you're spiritually dead, right? Nothing comes out, it only comes in. That is the meaning of death. Death is I take, and I don't give. Right, so that's the important quality of the shidduch. Now there's another lesson we learn from the Ran, and that is maybe the idea of harmony and balance. Because we know that Avraham Avinu represented in his own life the quality of loving kindness, but that needed to be counterbalanced with Sarah's inner strength and discipline. Sarah was the tough love parent, right? Sarah was the one who understood you have to send out Ishmael because he's such a destructive influence. So Chesed, the giving impulse, needs to be balanced with boundaries and discipline. That was the match of Avram and Sarah. Yitzchak resembled his mother. In Kabbalah, Yitzchak is said to be the quality of Gevurah, inner strength. It needed to be balanced with Chesed. The same way, Avram's Chesed needed to be balanced with Sarah's Gevurah. Yitzchak's Gevurah needed to be balanced with Rivka's Chesed. So the second lesson you see is not only the general importance of Chesed, but the notion, maybe not of opposites attract, but the notion that each one brings out in the other a quality that would otherwise be dormant. Now you have to be very careful. They have a famous story. I wouldn't say this in Or Sameach, but it's a teeny bit off color. No, not that much, but I can say it in Katamon or in Baka. That they say that George Bernard Shaw was once at a banquet with Isadora Duncan, who was a famous ballet dancer, and Duncan was a bit of a flirt. So she says to George Bernard Shaw, he says, "Mr. Shaw, we should, live together. We should get married together, because with my beauty and your brains, we would have fantastic children." So Shaw, who was somewhat acerbic, said, "That would be great, but what if they have, my looks and your brains? Then we're really in trouble." And so you have to be careful. Sometimes, let's say a person who is strong and disciplined, but maybe not so compassionate, marries a compassionate person who's not so disciplined, and he or she is all over the place. So the bad thing was each one might pick up the negative of the other, and then you're in trouble. But ideally, through the harmony and the balance, each one becomes more developed in an area that they lack. So the introverted, quiet person might have a greater ability to communicate by marrying someone that is able to deal well with people. And the extrovert might become a little more reflective by being connected to the introvert, right? That's kind of the inner meaning of the opposites attract. And that is actually the meaning of the second half of the verse in Genesis. It says, "It is not good for man to be alone. Let me make a helpmate to be opposite him." Now Chazal focused on the question, is it a helpmate or is it opposition? A helpmate to be opposite him. That's a contradiction. So one interpretation of the Gemara is, some people get it one way, some people get it the other way. Some people get the helpmate, and some people get the opposition. Right? You never know what's going to happen. But in Sifrei Chasidus, they say a beautiful thought, which is a very practical thought, that the help in a marriage is precisely because men and women view the world in different ways. I become a greater person not by marrying somebody who sees every single issue exactly the same way. In fact, you can even say, if all you have is somebody who sees the world 100% the same way, what is the point of the relationship? I simply have a different gender clone of myself. It's precisely the idea that men and women see the world in different ways that enable each person to become greater than they would have been by themselves. And that's the Ezer Kenegdo, and that is the harmony and the balance of the Chesed and the Gevurah. Right, so these are the two major points that emerge: the importance of Chesed and Rachamim, and the importance of a balance and a harmony in which each one learns from the differential midot of the other to bring out within their own personalities an aspect of the midah that would otherwise be dormant. So again, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless all of us, those of us who are already married with Shalom Bayit, and for those who have not yet found their zivug, May you have a year in which you do find your zivug, and also make your home a place for the Shekhinah. So have a good night and be well.
Yiboneh Archives,